Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, so you've sent in some really interesting sources this week, all sort of pointing towards how groups, shape our thinking and our actions.
Yeah, it's a huge topic.
It really is. So for this deep dive, our mission, basically, is to get to the heart of how our social world, our environments, actually mold what's going on inside our heads.
Okay.
We've got articles, some research papers,
Yeah.
quite a pile here. And we're going to try and pull out the key stuff, the main insights into why and how this social influence actually works.
It's sort of a shortcut through the complexities.
Exactly. Think of it like that. Getting the essentials without, wading through every single study yourself. It really hits home when you read a line like this one from the sources. We are not solitary islands. The minds we harbor are frequently sculpted by the forces of our social world.
That's a great quote. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? Like, where do my own opinions actually come from?
Right.
And what's so interesting, what the sources highlight, is that social psychology has been, digging into this for a very long time. This isn't some new trend.
No, not at all. Decades of research, really.
Exactly. Solid foundations.
Absolutely. And some of those early experiments, wow, they are just eye-opening when you look back.
Yeah.
Like Asch's conformity experiment.
Oh, yeah. The line studies. Classic.
Right, where people would literally say the wrong answer about something totally obvious, like how long a line was, just because everyone else in the group said it.
And Asch's work really highlighted what we now call normative social influence. It really boils down to that fundamental human need to fit in.
To not stand out.
Yeah, exactly. To not be the odd one out. That fear of rejection, of being ostracized by the group, it's a surprisingly potent motivator. Even when we know the group is wrong.
You can probably think of times you've done that yourself, right?
Yeah.
Gone along with something even with a nagging doubt.
Oh, definitely. That's that normative pull, that need to belong, just doing its thing.
Yeah, it's like your own senses are telling you one thing, but the pull of the group, the need for acceptance, just overrides it. And then you've got Milgram's obedience study. That one still gives you pause.
It really does. The whole setup.
The fact that ordinary people were willing to give what they thought were painful electric shocks just because a guy in a lab coat told them to.
Yeah.
It really shines a light on how much power authority figures can have, sometimes in ways we don't even fully recognize within a group setting.
Absolutely. Milgram really pointed to those hidden power structures the source material mentions. It's not just wanting to be liked, like in Asch's study.
Yeah.
It's also about our kind of ingrained responses to authority, to roles.
How easily our own sense of right and wrong can get sidelined by this feeling of obligation to whoever seems to be in charge.
Exactly. And if you zoom out, you can see these dynamics everywhere, right? Workplaces, politics, social structures.
For sure. And we can't forget Sharif's autokinetic effects study. That's another key one.
Right, the moving light point.
Yeah. The little dot of light in a dark room that seems to move, but it isn't actually moving. And when people guessed how much it moved on their own, their answers were all over the place.
Right, wide variation.
But then, after they talked about it as a group, their estimates started converging, becoming much more similar.
Precisely. Sharif really introduced this idea of informational social influence. Basically, when things are ambiguous, when we're not sure what's real or correct.
We look to others.
We look to others for cues, for information. The group's consensus becomes a sort of social proof. It defines reality for us in that uncertain moment.
Like if you're in a strange place and suddenly see everyone running.
Yeah, you'd probably start running too, right? Even if you have no idea why. You assume they know something you don't. That's informational influence.
So these early studies, they really laid the groundwork, didn't they?
Yeah.
They showed us that this desire for acceptance, the fear of rejection, plus just needing the world to make sense, it all pushes us to adopt group norms.
Yeah, and often without us even being fully aware it's happening.
Right.
And the source material, it breaks down these mechanisms of group influence really well into those two main types we've touched on, informational and normative.
Okay.
Understanding that distinction is pretty crucial, I think.
So, just to recap, informational influence is when we genuinely believe the group knows better. We think, okay, they probably have more information or understand this better than I do, especially when things are unclear, like Sharif's light. The group's answer feels like the right answer.
Exactly. It's a logical strategy in a way. I'm uncertain, they seem confident and agreed, so I'll trust their judgment.
Right. But then normative influence, that's more about the social side. wanting to be liked, accepted, avoiding disapproval. So, like in Asch's line study, we might privately think that's definitely the wrong line, but we say the wrong answer anyway to go along with the crowd.
Yeah, it's driven by that fundamental need for social connection, for belonging, public compliance, even with private disagreement.
And the sources point out these two often work together, right? It's not always neatly one or the other.
Oh, absolutely. They're frequently intertwined. You might start leaning towards the group's view because of the information they offer, that's informational, but the desire to stay in their good graces, that's normative, kind of cements that agreement. It happens consciously and unconsciously.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the sources then get into social identity and self-categorization, which I thought was fascinating. It's the idea that the groups we belong to actually become part of who we think we are.
Yes. Social identity theory. It's a really powerful concept. It basically says that our group memberships work, nationality, hobbies, whatever, they contribute significantly to our sense of self, our identity, our self-esteem. We draw part of who we are from those groups.
And that leads directly to this in-group favoritism and out-group bias idea.
It does, yeah. It seems almost natural, unfortunately. We tend to favor people in our in-groups, the groups we identify with.
We see them more positively.
Right, and sometimes we view out-groups, those we don't identify with, more negatively or stereotypically.
Think about sports rivalries, right? That instant us versus them, even if it's just a game.
Exactly. That illustrates it perfectly. It's a mechanism, maybe, to boost our own group's status and cohesion. If our group is good, then we feel good.
But the downside, as the source notes, is that it can fuel prejudice and conflict between different groups.
Definitely a potential downside.
And then self-categorization. What's the core idea there?
It's about how, in certain situations, we shift from seeing ourselves as unique individuals to seeing ourselves primarily as members of a specific group. And when that group identity becomes salient, it acts like a lens. It colors how we interpret things happening around us, especially if our group feels threatened or challenged.
So events aren't just happening to me, they're happening to us, to the group.
Precisely. And our thoughts and actions tend to align more with what we see as the group's perspective or interests. It helps explain things like collective action or why group conflicts can escalate so quickly.
It really underscores how group belonging shapes not just our self-perception, but also how we judge others, often reinforcing the group's shared beliefs. Okay, so we've got how groups form, how they influence individuals, but what happens when groups actually start making decisions together? This brings us to group polarization and collective decision-making.
Right, and this is where things can get, well, really interesting and sometimes a bit worrying.
How so?
Well, group polarization is this tendency for groups of like-minded people to end up holding views that are more extreme than their initial views were just from discussing it amongst themselves.
Oh, right, like echo chambers online.
Exactly like that. It's a perfect example. Constant reinforcement from similar viewpoints doesn't just solidify your opinion. It can actually push it further out, maybe to a point you wouldn't have reached on your own.
So if a group starts out slightly leaning one way,
after discussion, they might end up strongly leaning that way. Or if they were slightly opposed, they might become vehemently opposed. The initial inclination gets amplified.
why does that happen?
Well, the dynamic of conversation is key. Within a group that mostly agrees, you hear your own views echoed back, maybe with new arguments you hadn't thought of.
Reinforcement.
Right. It feels validating, it strengthens your conviction, maybe makes you more emotionally invested. It's like a feedback loop pushing everyone towards a more extreme pole.
And this can lead to what the source calls risky shifts. Groups making riskier decisions than individuals would, or sometimes more cautious ones.
Yes, both can happen, weirdly enough. Part of it might be this diffusion of responsibility.
The idea that it's not all on me.
Exactly. If the decision is collective, no single person feels solely accountable if things go wrong, which can make people more willing to endorse a riskier option.
Or maybe a very conservative one, to avoid any blame.
Possibly. And there's also that desire for consistency, wanting to be seen as a good, committed group member. That can push people to align with the perceived group consensus, which might be shifting towards an extreme.
You can definitely see how this plays out. Social movements becoming more radical, maybe. Or companies making huge bets that seem baffling in hindsight.
Precisely. Understanding polarization helps us analyze those kinds of collective behaviors, the good and the bad outcomes of group decision-making.
Now, something else crucial the source brings up. Unconscious influences. It's not always a conscious choice to conform, is it?
No, definitely not. A lot of this social influence operates below the radar, outside our conscious awareness. Our brains are just wired to pick up social cues automatically.
Like body language,
I
tone of
figured.
voice.
Exactly. Those nonverbal signals, we process them constantly, often without even realizing it, and they subtly shape our feelings, our attitudes, our decisions. That's the automaticity in social cues the source talks about.
And these cues can trigger biases we don't even know we have.
Mm-hmm. Which leads straight into implicit bias and the bias blind spot.
Ah, the blind spot. The idea that we're pretty good at spotting biases in other people,
Oh, yeah.
but terrible at seeing our own unconscious prejudices and assumptions.
It's a well-documented phenomenon. And that blind spot is significant because it helps maintain the status quo, right? It props up existing group norms, even unfair ones.
Because if we don't see our own bias, we're not likely to question things.
Exactly. We won't challenge the prevailing groupthink or the way things are done.
So becoming aware of these unconscious drivers, these hidden influences, is really key for making more, I guess, objective choices.
It is. For more thoughtful decisions, both individually and when we're in groups, it's about cultivating that self-awareness, trying to see those automatic reactions.
Which brings us neatly to another potential pitfall, the power and the peril of groupthink. We hear that term a lot.
You do.
What's the essence of it? Is it like when everyone in a meeting just nods along?
That can be part of it. At its core, groupthink is when the drive for unanimity, for everyone to agree, overrides realistic appraisal of alternatives. The pressure to conform becomes so intense that critical thinking just goes out the window.
Leading to bad decisions.
Often, yes. Irrational or poor decision-making outcomes because dissenting views are squashed or ignored.
The source talks about defensive cohesion. What's that?
It's particularly relevant in very close-knit, cohesive groups. Members value the group harmony so much.
They don't want to rock the boat.
Exactly. They avoid raising objections or expressing doubts, even serious ones, because they fear disrupting that unity or being seen as disloyal.
So everyone looks like they agree.
But underneath, there might be real reservations that never get voiced.
And the risk of poor decisions is huge then. Without different perspectives, without critical evaluation, you're way more likely to end up with flawed plans. The source mentions big historical examples, right? Military failures, business disasters.
Yes, some classic case studies are often attributed, at least partly, to groupthink dynamics. They really underscore the need to actively encourage open dialogue.
To create, as the source says, safe spaces for dissent.
Absolutely. Groups need ways to ensure people feel comfortable challenging ideas, offering different viewpoints without fear of negative consequences. You need mechanisms to fight that pressure for conformity.
It sounds like actively breaking that echo chamber is just vital for any group trying to make good choices.
It really is. Healthy debate, constructive conflict, they're essential to avoid the traps of groupthink.
Okay, so we've hit on some definite downsides, the perils of social influence, but it's not all bad, right? The sources are clear that group dynamics can be a force for good too.
Oh, definitely. It's a powerful tool, and it can be harnessed positively.
How do we do that? How can we use social influence for positive change?
Well, one way is leveraging social proof.
Yeah.
We talked about informational influence.
Right.
You can use that by showing people that desirable behaviors are common. Think about campaigns showing how many people are recycling or conserving water or getting vaccinated.
So if we see that lots of others are doing something positive,
We're more likely to do it too. It taps into both wanting to do the right thing, informational, and wanting to fit in with what others are doing, normative.
makes sense.
What else? Fostering inclusive dialogue. This is sort of the antidote to groupthink. By actively bringing in diverse perspective, encouraging critical discussion, valuing disagreement, groups can actually generate better, more creative, more robust solutions. You move beyond just seeking agreement to seeking the best outcome through collective intelligence.
So it's about making sure different voices are not just heard, but actually valued.
Precisely. Welcomed as essential for a fuller picture. And finally, the source mentions promoting empathy and connection.
How does that fit in?
Well, if we understand that everyone is subject to these social forces, that we all have in-groups and out-groups, that we're all influenced.
Maybe we can be a bit more understanding.
Exactly. Recognizing our shared vulnerability to these influences can help bridge divides, strengthen social bonds, and maybe reduce intergroup conflict. Seeing the common humanity beneath the group labels.
So it's about being more mindful, more intentional about the kinds of group environments we build and take part in.
That's a great way to put it. Consciously aiming for balanced, informed, and empathetic group dynamics leads to better decisions and, hopefully, a more harmonious society.
Okay, so wrapping this up for everyone listening,
Uh-huh.
the big takeaway here, I think, is just how powerful and, well, pervasive social influence is. It's constantly shaping us.
Every day.
What we think, how we feel, what we do, from those really conscious choices to fit in, right down to the biases we don't even know we have.
Yeah. And really understanding these mechanisms we've talked about, informational influence, normative influence, social identity, groupthink, all that stuff.
Gives you more agency, right?
It really does. It helps you become more aware of when and how you might be getting swayed by the group. It allows for more conscious, more considered choices.
Absolutely. Moving from just being pushed around by these forces to actually understanding them and navigating them better. So maybe a final thought to leave you with. Try to think of a specific time you really felt the pull of a group. Could be a big decision, could be something small. Were you aware of it then? Aware of the dynamics we've discussed? And looking back, what were the consequences, good or bad, of being influenced in that moment?
That's a good reflection exercise, applying these ideas to your own experience.
Definitely worth